Memphis basketball, they are currently in Huntsville to take on Alabama in an exhibition game. That's going on as we speak right now here on Monday night. You'll be watching this on Tuesday, so there's absolutely zero analysis we can give you from the exhibition.
We can say that there's a couple of injury things.
Right.
Musa Cisse's back healthy.
Yep.
Looks like Tyreek Smith after that whole saga that you missed out on. Luckily you missed out on that.
Yeah, I did.
I was talking to people, and it sounded like the update that I got was they made him run for missing study hall one day, and he just started throwing haymakers at him. like, where's my NIL money? Well, what about my role? You said I was going to be starting at the 4, But they made him run, and it sort of things got said. But you missed that. He was out. He's out for tonight. And then Alabama, I don't know how much we're actually going to see because Alabama's without 3 starters and then 4 guys that play in their rotation, including those 3 starters. So it's like I don't know how much we're going to see, but it's still nice to get that type of game. Number 2 team in the country, seemingly on the road in Huntsville before the season gets here. But we can't really provide analysis because it's happening as we speak, as we're recording.
Yeah, no in-game analysis for the Alabama game, but Memphis's regular season starts next Tuesday. So as you're watching this, or next Monday. Sorry. Yep. So as you're watching this, 6 days away for us right now, a week away. But it's a good place to start. Missouri's not a top-tier team like some of these exhibition games that Memphis has played. But if you look at the KenPom rankings, they're 51. Memphis is 42. We know Missouri was a disappointing team last year. We expected
that's underselling it. They didn't win an SEC game. They were horrible.
Yeah, especially after the season they had 2 years ago in 2022. Really, really solid, tough team that gave everybody a hard night out. Last year when Memphis played them, we thought Memphis just beat a very good basketball team. That was not the case. They've kind of reloaded. They've got a solid roster. It should be a really good test to start the actual season for Memphis.
Yes, it should be, because Dennis Gates knows he's got to get it going. You can't have a defeated season in the SEC and SEC play. Even if you made the tournament a couple years ago, you can't have that and expect to not be on the hottest of hot seats. So he knows he's got to get it going quick, and I'll give him credit. He went into the portal this offseason and made some additions that I think can put them in at least a competitive spot. Brought in Mark Mitchell from Duke. He brought in Tony Perkins from Iowa, who was a 14-point-per-game scorer. You still have Tamar Bates, who is their leading returning scorer with 13.5 points per game last year. You have some size there. Of course, Mark Mitchell adds to that, but you have Josh Gray, who's a 7-footer from South Carolina, went to LSU to start his career. You have a guy from Overtime Elite who's 7 foot, and Peyton Marshall. So you have a team that they have put together that's at least serviceable. On the paper, it's serviceable. They still have Caleb Grill, who was at Iowa State a couple years ago, really good contributor to TJ Otzelberger's team. So I just sort of look at this Mizzou team. It's going to be a nice test, but it's one that I think the Tigers, if they want to take themselves seriously, should pass. They really should pass this one.
Yeah, I agree. Kind of like we said, they're not a spectacular team, but this is just a really solid college basketball team, in my opinion. Like, I think they can. I think they'll upset some teams in the SEC this year. I think they'll have some of those games. They should be really competitive with some of the additions that they have, plus the guys that they have returning. So I think they're a solid team, and I think at least for a opening game matchup, I think it should give us a good idea for where Memphis stands right off the bat. I mean, obviously, things are going to change as the season progresses. This team should get better as the season rolls on. But with starting against North Carolina and Alabama and having these exhibition games, Memphis should be ready to play Missouri and to be able to walk out of that game with a win.
Yeah, and you're at home, so we know how road basketball is, no matter who it is. Like if it's an SEC team, if it's a really, top 15 team, it's really hard to play on the road in Memphis. And I think this is one of those games, especially first game of the year against a solid opponent, a power conference opponent. You should get that the FedEx Forum pretty packed for it, and it should be a fun one. Now for Memphis, like I'm still very curious about what this opening night rotation is going to look like. Obviously, you've had some injuries. You've been banged up. But, starters, I think you're looking at what we have been talking about: Tyrese Hunter, PJ Haggerty, Colby Rogers, Nick Jourdain, and Dane Danger. But I want to see how that actually looks against some solid competition in the regular season when Memphis is running some things. In that North Carolina game, and obviously in all exhibitions, Penny kind of keeps everything close to the vest. Doesn't want to run a lot of things offensively. Doesn't really want to show anything to anybody. So I want to see like how these guys roll out there, what their chemistry looks like, and sort of how it goes from there. And then the rotation is going to be interesting because, Jared Harris, a freshman who we didn't really expect to play, it seems like he's going to get some minutes. You have to balance those with PJ Carter and Tyreek Smith. And, how deep is this bench going to go with a seemingly not so deep team necessarily, not the normal team where you can play 10 or 11 guys. It's going to be I think this year, as opposed to last year, is going to be even more of a learning experience. Because last year we knew what it was going to look like going into the season. You had 10 guys you were comfortable with rolling out there every night. We learned later that they didn't get along so well, so that changed. But this year, I think we're going to learn as we go who can actually go and who can't.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting too, because we've seen in Penny's tenure that it does take him some time to figure out his rotations and his lineups and what he feels like is optimal for the team. So does he have a better idea of that right now? Probably the biggest storyline we've had all offseason with Memphis basketball, at least from recruiting and on the floor stuff, is these guys being in since July and how big of a benefactor that is for the team. So does that help, shortening the rotation? Does that help with the lineups and the amount of rotations and how long the starters play versus, do we see the continued platoon swaps, or do we see 2 and 3 guys come out? I think it is, for any coach, for any team, it's a balancing act. It's something that you have to figure out with every specific team. But has the early arrival of these players given him more time to lock in on that and have a feeling of, these are the guys that I want on the floor together? When we make that first swap in the first half, who's coming in, who's coming out? So I think that'll be really interesting, because it's been something that a lot of people have been critical of Penny over. So does he have it locked in at the beginning of this year? And you don't get 10, 15 games down the road and you're still seeing new starting lineup combinations. And like I mentioned, the platoon swaps, like how does this all look from night one?
I know this has been an overrated and overused talking point this entire offseason, but I think it's like 2022, where like going into the year, you're asking yourself, okay, you have Kendrick Davis and DeAndre Williams. Who's going to be the supporting cast around them? Who's going to be the three-point shooter? As we saw as the season got along, even though he wasn't a good three-point shooter at his previous stop, Keontae Kennedy comes along and starts knocking down some threes. You feel good about that. Then you're like, okay, who's your defensive do-it-all ace? It ended up being Elijah McCadden as the season went along. I think you'll start to see guys separate themselves, but I don't know if you're going to know from night one. I just don't necessarily get that feeling with this team. I think they're going to still, as much as we talk about, they've been on campus since June, I still think there's going to be a growing and maturing period for this particular group. Last year, you just had a feeling that he was going, like he had so many different big name guys, he was going to get them all on the floor.
Yeah.
This year, I don't know if he necessarily has that. So if they've been struggling in camp and we don't know about that, they may get less minutes, and we're going to be questioning that. So I just think because he's been so quiet, Penny, for the most part this offseason, it's just a lot more unknown about this team. Not necessarily a bad thing, but it's an unknown. And I think people want to know as soon as possible. And I think we'll get our first taste 6 days from now against Mizzou.